Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Secure Insights podcast. I'm Rosie, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Mike from Paramify as we dive into the world of automated compliance. In this episode, we explore the real world challenges Paramify is solving, why compliance is a critical priority from scrappy startups to large enterprises, and we get into the weeds of frameworks like FedRAMP, including what it takes to achieve it. We also talk about how Paramify sets itself apart in the crowded compliance space and what's coming up for them over the next 12 months. It's a packed episode and I'm excited to get stuck in. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop us a message or a review of your feedback. So I am delighted to be joined by Mike over at Paramify. Instead of me kind of running through the intro and everything, if I just hand it over to yourself and run through a little bit about your background.
You bet. Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I joined Paramify just about a month after they launched the kind of MVP product late in 2023. Prior to that, was at a tech company called Divvy in the fintech space. We did corporate credit cards and expense management. At that company, we sold to Bill.com in 2021. Stuck around there for a little bit and then was starting to dabble in consulting, a little bit in venture capital, and met Kenny, who's the founder of Paramify, and started teaching him how to take his product to market. Was on demos with him for a few weeks, and I've sold a lot of things in my career. I started in door-to-door sales in college, and have been in sales ever since. And and I've sold a lot of stuff, and I've never seen people as happy as the people that were talking to Paramify with the problems that Paramify was solving. And so it piqued my interest, and I started to get more and more involved, and then eventually, jumped in full time, and here we are. It's been awesome.
Love it, like a no-brainer. Love that
Yeah,
story.
that's right.
So I guess just to kind of kick off this conversation, let's just start right at the beginning. I think every great company kind of starts with like a clear purpose. And I guess for the listeners who maybe don't know much about Paramify or just new to Paramify, what what problems do you solve? What do you do?
Yeah, and at its most basic, we automate risk management. And so there's a lot of elements to that when you look at, and we work primarily with mid-market and enterprise companies. Um, and they have a lot of, most enterprise companies are spending $3.5 to $5 million annually on compliance. And it's all revenue enabling. So typically they're getting compliance so that they can close deals, they can get additional, into additional verticals or sell additional products, whatever it might be. And so, but as part of that process, there's two aspects to it. There's security things that have to happen. You have to have firewalls, you have to have single sign, you have to do all those things. And then there's this compliance burden where once you're doing all of the security things, even if you're doing them perfectly, you still have to go document it all and write really long security plans and do continuous monitoring and kind of meet all these requirements that are pretty mundane and manual and tedious and mind numbing sometimes. And so what Pramify does is we see ourselves as an Iron Man suit for GRC professionals where the security work still has to happen. But if you've got somebody that knows what they're doing, you have a Tony Stark, they can get in the Iron Man suit and it makes the compliance work just 10,000 times as efficient. So workloads that normally are, 9 to 12 months of work, we can get done in days.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think to be honest, solving kind of real problems that just help the world is one thing, but I think being able to identify this early on is another. And obviously you've only been around for a couple years or so. What was kind of the inspiration behind launching Paramify? Were there like a specific challenge or I
Yeah.
guess industry shift you saw?
Yeah, so Kenny was the founder. He's our CEO now and had been in GRC for forever. Did it at PwC, did it at Google, did it at American Express. He was at Adobe when they stopped shipping CD-ROMs and started hosting things in the cloud. And so obviously, security became a big deal. And so they built a thing called the Common Controls Framework, which was a way to say like, hey, we're doing all of these compliance things, but like we have, we're using Okta, for example, for single sign-on, and we have to say that a million times for all these different compliance frameworks. Is there a way that we could just do that in one place and then have it, populate everywhere else? And that was kind of where the seed was planted, I think, for Kenny. And then his team at Adobe inherited FedRAMP, and it was, pain beyond anything he'd imagined up till that point. So he actually left the industry. It was that bad. Got roped back in by a couple people that needed help with their own FedRAMP, and as part of it said, if I'm going to do this again, I'm going to build something that helps me automate the parts I hate the most, which was a lot of paper chase and manual process. And so he built a little Google script Excel sheet prototype that was 10 times better than the manual way of doing it, and then eventually built it into a SaaS, which is what grew into Paramify.
And I think anything automated, like even if you think about your kind of day-to-day life, if you can get like 30% of your time back, what would you do with it? So being able to
Yeah.
bring that into compliance, security, anything like that, think about kind of the possibilities you can do there.
For sure, yeah, and we like to say security is the goal, compliance is the outcome.
Mhm.
The issue we see a lot right now is compliance becomes the goal because if you think of it from a startup's point of view, they're a new company, they're starting to grow, they finally have a shot at like a well-known logo, and then the logo says, "Well, are you SOC 2 certified?" And they're like,
Mhm.
"Ah." So their goal is just get compliant, get the sticker, prove that I have this so I can go close this deal. What we would rather the focus be is how do we build a great security program and then just automate the compliance so that you don't have to think about it. And then people can spend their time on real security work, which means data's better protected, there's less breaches, everything from companies to personal data to country data is better protected.
I mean, you kind of went on to the question I was about to ask next, is kind of zooming out a little bit. I guess compliance isn't normally the, I guess, a buzzword that startups maybe get overly excited about.
Yeah.
But it is such a big deal for startups and like SaaS companies and everything. Why is that? Is it just to kind of land these large logos and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's usually revenue driven. There's two pieces to it. Like a data breach can be catastrophic for a startup, for a young company. There's very little protections against it and liability if you breach somebody's data, and it can put companies under. So it is a big deal to have good security and to protect your client's data. And then from there, typically it's revenue enabling. So it's, people normally don't say like, "Hey, I want to do FedRAMP because I want to have really great security." They say, "I want to do FedRAMP because, GSA or Department of Homeland Security wants to buy my product. And in order for that to happen, I have to go do FedRAMP." And so typically it's to unlock verticals, unlock products,
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
Makes sense. And I guess even when they do understand a compliance itself, it still kind of feels like a bit of a maze, or it's a little bit intimidating. Like you said, kind of FedRAMP there. Um, I guess how is that? I guess how do these companies approach this? Why is it so confusing to these companies?
Yeah, the compliance frameworks are all really different, and so especially for the clients we're working with most of the time, where they're mid-market or enterprise companies, they are working in a lot of different frameworks. So you've got things like SOC 2 that are relatively that they're not crazy confusing, and there's some great products out there that automate a lot of it. But you've got 30-ish maybe controls that you have to be compliant with. Um, and then you go to do FedRAMP, and there's like 700 to 800 controls you got to be compliant with. And some of them are duplicative. Some of them are the same as with SOC 2, and some of them are different. And then, you get into a healthcare vertical and you got to do HIPAA, and that's a whole new set of controls, but it also
Mhm.
overlaps some with the other two things. And so managing kind of that balance of like, I've got thousands of controls across a whole bunch of different frameworks. And what Pranify focuses on is how do we boil that down to like, what are we actually doing for security? If we just focus on our capabilities and what we're actually doing, then we can map those to whatever compliance frameworks we want, but we can keep the workload manageable because we might have, a couple thousand controls across a lot of frameworks that we're worried about, but we're not doing a couple thousand different things.
Mhm.
We're doing, 100 things, or I don't know, 150 things, and there's mapping to all these different frameworks. And so it's intimidating and it's confusing because it's ill-defined and it changes. And when there's breaches, things adjust. And that's where we see a product like Paramify that can come in and kind of simplify those things down.
And I guess it's not just about kind of checking those boxes as well. It's completely kind of, I guess, automating, like you said, simplifying compliance for these companies.
That's right. Yeah, it's not just about the sticker. There's if you dive into the GRC space in general, there's a growing frustration with what's happening with SOC 2. It's become kind of a race to the bottom where you have a lot of companies that are in the space that automate different pieces of it. Every company, every cloud company out there needs to go do it. And so because costs are getting driven lower, there's a feeling that quality is also getting driven lower. And so then it's like, well, if it's not accomplishing what it should, then what do we do? Right. Like if quality is pushed low and our data is not actually safe. So yeah, it does. We do want it to be more than just checking boxes. It's more than just a sticker. It's companies, focusing on building very solid security programs.
Nice. I think we kind of need to dig into something a little bit more specific as well. And we've spoken about FedRAMP kind of the last 10 minutes or so, but that in particular has a reputation for being a little bit more complex and heavy. What makes that specifically kind of different to the other frameworks?
Yeah, it's a great question. FedRAMP, so a little background on what FedRAMP exactly is. So if you look at government agencies, Department of Defense, CIA, Homeland Security, or it might be, they have their own networks, closed networks that they work on. So like the Department of Defense has NIPRNet, and they have a super secret one called SIPRNet that they use to send, attack packages to the fighter jets, or whatever it might be. Um, and back when cloud companies were starting to grow and get bigger, employees at these agencies were saying like, "Hey, I would really love to use AWS, or I would really love to use Adobe, or I would love to use whatever other product." But there was no way for those products to access those closed networks. And so what FedRAMP is what it was a way to issue what's called an ATO, an authority to operate, which basically gives these private companies the ability to operate on these closed networks. So that's what FedRAMP is it was a program to say, hey, instead of having every agency go off on their own and give ATOs to the different products they want to use, let's create one centralized place to do it. When you bring a lot of agency requirements together, though, you end up with a very comprehensive program. And FedRAMP is very comprehensive when it comes to security. It is a beautifully designed security program. Like if when breaches happen, they don't happen to FedRAMP authorized products. Like they just it's a very good, and there's a reason that that same framework has been used across the world. Canada has a version, Great Britain has a version, Europe's got a version. There's one in Australia, Asia. So anyway, it's been copied over because it is a really great framework. But because it's so comprehensive, the scale, like I mentioned before, with SOC 2, you're going to have 30 or so control requirements that you have to go meet. With FedRAMP, you're going to have 700 to 800. And so there's just the scope of it is just drastically different, and there's a lot more requirements to it. There's things like you need a government agency sponsored, which they're looking to change right now with some of the new things they're doing. But it's a pretty difficult process. It opens a lot of opportunity, and so there's some good too as well. It's great security, which is awesome, but it is a very difficult thing to go tackle. And we see companies all the time that have spent, a couple $1 million and years of their time trying to go achieve FedRAMP and haven't quite gotten there.
You kind of touched upon like opening opportunity then. I know we've previously spoken about kind of, I guess, for some smaller startups, or smaller companies, it's kind of a revenue generating kind of label almost that they're kind of looking after or looking for, sorry. But also on the product side, if you're kind of FedRAMP certified, you're unlikely to be able to be breached. What other kind of opportunities could it provide?
Yeah, I mean the biggest one, if the U.S. federal government is the largest purchaser of software in the world. So as far as opportunities that it opens, like it's the whale, it's Moby Dick, right? Like that's the white whale.
Mhm.
Um, so it does open a big opportunity. And if you've got FedRAMP, there's a FedRAMP marketplace that when you look at how FedRAMP's been kind of done up until now, most sponsorships, most companies have gotten ATOs, and they're sponsored by a few specific agencies. There's like 9 or 10 of them that have done almost all of the sponsorships. But you've got 438 federal agencies ish. Some got closed recently, another one's open. So somewhere around that number. A lot of federal agencies out there. So most of them are shopping from that FedRAMP marketplace. So they don't have the resources, their time to go sponsor their own products. They're just saying, okay, what's already been FedRAMP authorized? And they'll go there and respond to that.
Understood. And I guess once these kind of companies have taken these steps to become kind of FedRAMP authorized, how does Paramify then come in and help teams prepare and navigate that kind of FedRAMP journey?
Yeah. Yeah. So what we tell people is you really want to back it out a step. What most people will do with FedRAMP is they'll say, okay, so we've got 724 controls we have to meet, or control requirements we have to meet. So I'm going to create a spreadsheet with 724 lines, and I'm going to check the boxes one by one. And so what we encourage people to do is take a step back from that, say, okay, what are we doing now for security, and what are all of the capabilities that FedRAMP needs to have to go do it? So let's focus on those 100 things instead of 724 requirements. Let's start with planning. Let's plan really well what we're going to go do. Then we'll go execute on that plan. We'll go implement everything. We'll run tests against it to make sure it's working. So as part of an audit, you do what's called a POAM and find vulnerabilities and address them. And then we report all of that. And in Paramify, we do it both in an SSP, Word document, Excel documents, and then also in a machine readable version that's a little bit easier to audit, and is kind of where FedRAMP is moving towards. But our approach is to say, let's start at the very beginning. Let's do some solid planning. Let's get a good game plan in place. And then we just execute that plan and report against it on an ongoing basis. And that's the other thing that Paramify helps with a ton is on a month-to-month basis, if you are FedRAMP authorized, you are delivering these POAMs to your agency every single month to show, hey, we went and scanned everything. We found our vulnerabilities, found these things. Here's how we're addressing them. Here's the timelines we're meeting to address them. And Paramify helps to kind of automate that continuous monitoring process.
Fantastic. So are you kind of, I guess, saying and going back on kind of what you said before then, is FedRAMP coming more relevant to maybe commercial kind of companies, not just like those selling directly to the government?
Yeah, it's becoming more relevant. We have had clients come in that are saying like, yeah, we want to go get FedRAMP because it'll open doors for us even outside of government. It's pretty that element is pretty rare. But what you are going to see right now is FedRAMP. There's 450-ish FedRAMP companies today. That number, the FedRAMP, the PMO FedRAMP office feels like they will 20x that number. And so 9,000 companies long term. Still not a ton of companies, right? It's a low number. Um, so, but there's other frameworks, like there's a Department of Defense framework called CMMC that if you are anywhere in the defense industrial base, so anywhere from Boeing down to the mom and pop shop in Des Moines, Iowa, that makes the bolts for the landing gear for the Boeing aircraft, they all have to be compliant with CMMC. And part of those requirements is that every cloud company they use has to be FedRAMP equivalent. And so anything that touches the controlled unclassified information. So there are a lot of companies will be affected by that don't sell into government directly, but their client base does. And so they're going to need to also go be FedRAMP. Even GRC tools like Paramify fall in that category sometimes. We're working mostly with private companies. We have agency clients as well, but some work only with private companies. And those companies work with agencies, and so the GRC tool itself has to be FedRAMP. So yeah, it will get, I think, more and more common. I think it'll be a little slow if you're not trying to sell directly to the government, but I think there will be some residual impacts there.
It's really interesting if you're kind of not in this space, and obviously I'm not a technical person at all as a headhunter. You don't realize kind of what's kind of going on behind almost closed doors with compliance and authorization and everything like that. It's interesting to kind of get such an insight into the space. Even thinking about the vendors kind of we work with on the recruitment side, I know a couple of them have like FedRAMP authorization, but you kind of know what it means, but not the kind of insight into it. So it's interesting just to have the
Yeah.
conversation.
Well,
Um,
and I've been on the other side too from a sales perspective where I'm like, hey, when I was at Divvy, another startup prior, we had clients that would come in saying, hey, we would love to sign up. Do you guys have a SOC 2? And I'm like, no. And I'd ask our security team, they'd be like, yeah, it's too expensive and complicated for right now. Let's do it down the road. And I'm like, why are we walking away from this deal? Like they're
yeah.
ready to buy. So I get
Yeah,
it. Like it's very different to look at it from the other side for sure.
so fantastic. So kind of wanted to now move on to, I guess, the results that you're seeing at Paramify specifically. What kind of feedback are you hearing, I guess, directly from customers that are going through the journey or have been through the journey?
Yeah. Yeah, we the feedback we hear honestly is pretty awesome. We because of what the product does, it's essentially taking all of, part of the FedRAMP process. And they're aiming to change some of these things, and so hopefully it will. But part of it is you have to write a system security plan, which can be, 1,000+ pages long, about how you're meeting all of the requirements, what you're doing to meet them, what role, like who at the company is in charge of that. How are you making sure it happened? What are you doing if it didn't happen? Like everything. It's very, very detailed, and it's very you know, and so the system security plan will cost companies, if you want to pay an advisor to write it, a few $100,000. If you want to write it internally, it's, we meet people all the time that are 9 months in. They're like, hey, I'm halfway done. Like, can you guys help me finish it? And so what Paramify does is we team up with these advisors and consultants and give them a tool, or if they have an internal team, give them a tool where that documentation piece can be done very, very efficiently. We've had clients go 0 to done on their FedRAMP packages in a matter of, a few hours. And so if the security work is done, and that's the big kicker, right? Is like the security work has to actually happen. But if that's been done, the feedback is pretty awesome because it's taking these tasks, or it's taking the continuous monitoring and ongoing, reporting on POAMs every month. It's taking these tasks from just days and weeks of time down to, hours, or if it's months of time, down to days. And so it's in automating those things. The other thing that's nice is most security professionals didn't study this and get into it so that they could, copy paste all day long in a Word
Mm.
document. And so it allows them as well to get back to the parts of the job that captivated them at the beginning. And so the feedback we get is awesome. People love the process. It's almost embarrassing to use the term delightful when you're talking about FedRAMP, but I think people are pretty delighted with the ease of getting through it.
Good, good. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, even just kind of speaking to yourself and doing the research that I've seen and the feedback you've got on the website and LinkedIn and everything like that, you can tell kind of how well you guys have done within the first, 2 years. So it'll be interesting to see what the next kind of two is going to look like.
Totally.
And I guess beyond that kind of positive feedback, and I know we have kind of touched upon this, but I imagine there's moments where this has or compliance has become like a business enabler. Is there, I guess, a story where you've helped or Paramify has helped a customer land like a deal or expand into a new market because they were compliance ready?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. I mean, most of our clients coming in are coming in because they have a deal that is hinging on them being FedRAMP authorized.
Mhm.
And the cool part about it is, for a lot of them, they've got a deal that says like, hey, the contract says you have to be FedRAMP authorized by this date. And by the time we meet them or they come in, usually they'll try to do it on their own for a bit. And then they'll realize like, oh shoot, we're in over our heads and we're not going to get there. And so then they have two options. They either go outsource it and pay a ton of money, or they bring in somebody who knows, get a tool like Paramify, and try to knock out really quick. And so a lot of people that we meet are in that space where they need to move really, really fast, in order to save a deal or save a contract. And so, yeah, we've seen it happen over and over again, everywhere from big enterprises all the way down to, we had one client come in. It was a three-man company, and their first client
Wow.
was the Department of State. And so, literally from like day one, they had to go get FedRAMP to start working with them. So yeah, we've seen it a lot, and it's been really, really cool because, yeah, you get to see all these companies. The enterprises are all in FedRAMP. They sell to the government. That's awesome. But some of these mid market and small businesses and startups, it's cool to kind of see. It's usually the biggest contract the company's ever gotten. It's, an exciting moment for them, and we're able to be like a small part of it and making it achievable.
Love that. Yeah, love that. And I guess kind of compliance is such a growing field. How are you kind of standing out? How do you differ from other people in the space?
Yeah, we differ in a lot of ways. Our whole approach of risk solutions, focusing on capabilities rather than controls, is a big differentiator. But if I was going to sum it up in one big differentiator, it would be that most compliance tools have been built by product people or go-to-market people. Um, and Pramify was built, Kenny was a GRC professional for 20 years. And so the pain points that Pramify addresses are the pain points that those people actually feel the most in their day to day. And so when it comes to like impacting their day-to-day work life the most, that's where I think Paramify stands out. And so there's a whole bunch of things that come off of that. The speed that we do things is really incredible. Like the usability of the platform and how user friendly it is really, really different for most GRC tools. Our use of AI is pretty special, very different than most people now are using generative AI to write SSPs, which for us is what we were doing 16 months ago.
Oh yeah.
And so there's just a lot of things in it that are different, but I think the biggest, to sum it up, it would be for a GRC person working in the day-to-day trying to comply with these different frameworks. Paramify solves their pain points more than anything else out there.
And I love that Kenny, your CEO, was in that position as well for what, 20 years or something. So he's kind
Yeah,
of been on the ground feeling, like you said there, that kind of pain. So that's
he's
fantastic. So
lived
it's kind
it.
of, yeah, first-hand
Yeah.
experience. You kind of touched upon AI there, and I think in any conversation ever, really, we have to kind of talk about it. And I think kind of zooming back how regulations aren't slowing down anytime soon. How do you see kind of the future of compliance really evolving, especially because every regulations about AI is changing, privacy, everything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, compliance is going to change right along with it. There will always need to be a human element because in order to have real security or compliance, you have to have an assurance piece. And an assurance piece means audit. And even that, if we abdicate that completely to machines, you lose an element of somebody looking and saying, oh, yes, the machines were also configured correctly. Like, um, that having been said, we think AI can do most things in it. You'll need, like I said at the beginning, we see it as an Iron Man suit. So you'll need
Mhm.
a Tony Stark in there. But for that person, we think this AI will enable them to do a lot of what they're trying to do now. And so I think it'll be well beyond generative AI, writing things for people. I think it'll be well beyond, a virtual CISO at the company that can answer questions about compliance or give direction. I think it's well beyond all of that. And we have some announcements coming out in the next month or so on what we've been building that I think will be pretty impactful.
Fantastic. And I think when it comes to AI and humans need to, it's almost working as that kind of teammate to each other. AI can't replace everyone and everything. It's being able to kind of, I guess, build that trust between both parties. And where do you still need that human touch, and where can AI come in and, I guess, kind of automate processes to free up more time, for example? Um,
Yeah.
you kind of touched upon there that over the next kind of few months you're looking at, I guess, some product launches or anything like that. Where's kind of Paramify headed in the next few years? What's kind of the next milestone, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. The way we see Pramify growing is into kind of the ultimate risk management tool for enterprises. When you look at managing risk at a complex organizations and what they deal with, there's just no tool that's built better for it. And so that's where we see ourselves growing. And so when you fast forward a year, 2 years, 5 years, that can grow in a lot of different directions. If we can satisfy really complex companies, we can also likely satisfy really complex agency needs. There we can likely work with a lot of internationally companies that are complex and everything like that. So yeah, where we see ourselves growing, like where we really dominate right now is with mid-market and enterprise companies and helping them through their compliance and long term it's helping in the risk management overall.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate kind of your time today. We always close these podcasts with some kind of form of advice. So if we close this one as well, I guess, what would you say to kind of a founder or maybe like a technical leader who's overwhelmed with the idea of compliance? What advice would you
Yeah.
give?
Yeah, my honestly, the biggest advice that I would give people is like take a deep breath and just find somebody that knows. There's platforms out there that help with a lot of it. There's consultants and advisors that help with a lot of it. If you have funds for an internal hire, that can help with a lot of it. It can be done without those people. So we've seen people that just learn it and do it. So it's not to say it can't be, but where I see most people fail is when they are just saying like, I'll figure it out as I go, and they end up spending more time and more money than they would have spent if they had just hired somebody or found a consultant or found a tool at the
Hmm.
beginning. So if it is something you're going to tackle, compliance overall, it's all achievable. It's been done a lot of times. There are really, I look at it like anytime I do a house project or a yard project, if it's overly difficult, I'm like, you know what? There's probably a tool that's been built for this that I just don't know about. And inevitably, there is something that somebody has figured out that makes it very intuitive and easy. And compliance is the same way. Like that tool exists. So if you need help finding it, feel free to reach out. But it is manageable. So if it's feeling like you're hitting constant dead ends, there's probably a tool that you're missing.
Love that. Love that. Well, lastly, if anyone has any questions or I guess wanted to get in contact with yourself, what would be the best way just to reach out?
Yeah, LinkedIn's easy. I think I have a book my time link on LinkedIn too. My email address is on there, so we're super open. Feel free to reach out to us at Paramify. We love pointing people in the right direction. We're not a fit for everyone, and we're well aware of that. So we're not gonna, we're open to helping point people in the right direction. So yeah, any of those avenues is great.
Fantastic. And we'll drop like links into our comment section and everything just to make it easy for people to find your website, LinkedIn, everything like that. But thank you so much for joining us this week on Secure Insights. And yeah, hopefully we'll catch you maybe in a few months and see where you're going to go with this one.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.